Hi, my name is Dr. Stephen Cernsey with the Modern Partnership Institute. I'm excited to talk to you today about possibilities in relationship structures that may have not been evident to you in the past. While people in the LGBTQIA plus community have, or certain parts of that community have often explored alternative relationship structures and alternatives to monogamy, for most of the heteronormative straight world, non monogamy has not long been an option that has been considered. So today, that's what we're going to talk about, this consideration. No doubt, if you're watching this video, you've probably already started thinking about non-monogamy and the possibilities of it. And I'm going to try to give a really fair overview of options related to monogamy and various relationship structures that involve non-monogamy, so that you can think about what it is that you want out of your relationships and what it is that you're interested in your own life. While I'm certainly not an expert in all of these relationship structures, I do have experience with all of them, and I hope that from what I have learned through my own reading, through my own research, and through my own experience, I'm able to guide you to a place where you have a better understanding of what options are available to you and what some of the benefits of those options, as well as some of the challenges of those options, might be. So, the first thing to recognize as you consider non monogamy is you're not alone. As I've already said, people in the queer community, in particular in the gay male community, have often uh, developed relationship structures that were not centered around sexual and sometimes romantic monogamy. But additionally, we find now more and more in various straight communities, more people considering non monogamous relationship dynamics. Now, the first thing we have to sort of openly address is that non monogamy has a long history within humanity. People who look at how relationship structures evolve tend to recognize that monogamy within human societies really didn't come about until the beginning of the agricultural periods in each society. So, in pre agricultural times, many societies were not based around a couple, right? One male, one female coupled together to have children, but were sometimes based around various communal arrangements, various couples, sometimes a mother with her family, whereas the one mother having multiple male partners, sometimes multiple male partners within the community, sometimes there being various arrangements and cultural arrangements that sort of structured these. Now, again, I'm not saying this means there was some sort of sexual free for all in the pre-agricultural era, but more and more we've come to realize that there certainly wasn't the idea of a nuclear family with one man, one woman having sexual exclusivity, for some sort of lifelong commitment. That actually is an ideal that came about in the United States primarily and in a lot of Western Europe in the period around the 1950s. Now, don't get me wrong, before that, there were monogamous ideals, but those ideals were rarely lived out. When I say ideal, I don't mean it was something everybody did. It was something everybody thought they probably should do, but didn't. We know, in particular, among the wealthy, it was very common to have multiple romantic and sexual partnerships aside from your marriage in many Western societies. It was also common, less so, to have multiple romantic and non-romantic sexual partners in the poorer communities than when we look, for example, in medieval Europe. But instead, what we had was generally shorter term relationships. So serial monogamy. So people who'd be monogamous for a while in that relationship move on to another relationship. Whereas the ideal of marriage as a lifelong commitment was more often um, lived out in the rich although with various, romantic and sexual dalliances on the side. So again, when we look at the long-term history of humanity, we see that monogamy has not been the norm. When we look at the shorter-term history, we see that monogamy hasn't really been the norm either. It's been sort of idealized as something that would be really good to do, but not actually lived out. And even as we see in sort of the U.S. culture of the 1950s, where in particular in middle class white culture, monogamy sort of took on this role, and the nuclear family took on this role as being, excuse me, took on this role as being the bedrock of society. Um, Even then, we see multiple affairs often being part. We see um, unions being maybe being lifelong, but not being happy lifelong unions. And then, of course, many of us probably know and are the result of such partnerships where there were people in long term relationships that were really unhappy or that involved various infidelities. So, I say this to let you know that monogamy has never been the norm in terms of actual practice in humanity. Instead, we had an ideal of monogamy in the post agricultural era, so for the last few thousand years, but even that ideal has often not been carried out. And then that's only in the straight community. When, like I said, in the gay male community, there's long been practices of various open uh, relationship structures around perhaps sexual openness or perhaps sexual and romantic openness. So, having said that, I know that you're probably thinking, all right, in theory, sure, non monogamy has been an option. In theory, in history, yeah, but I don't know anybody who's not monogamous, especially if you're coming from a straight, heteronormative marriage background, maybe. But the truth is that when we peel back the layers on society, we see that over 50% of people today say they have been in some sort of non monogamous arrangement. Often these arrangements are not openly talked about. Often they have, certain limitations on how they work out. Um, but we know that over 50% of people have had some sort of non monogamous consensual experience. Um, and that number seems to be growing. In particular, we see in the post COVID period more and more couples looking to re examine their relationship agreements and re examine what it is that's important in their relationships and what it is that they might want in other types of relationships. So I just want you to know that even though you may feel very alone, you're not. You've never been alone if you're considering this, and you're not alone if you continue to consider this. So, we do hope that your curiosity will lead to conversations with others, and in particular with your partner. And I hope that you will continue to thoughtfully explore non monogamy or monogamy before you move forward. Because it's my hope that whether you continue in a monogamous relationship or you move into some form of non monogamy, you finish this journey in a happier place, in a place where you know that you have reflected on what you want out of life and you have made decisions to move forward with that, rather than feeling as if you are bound to what society tells you you have to do and that you're following those societal norms because you feel trapped in them. So, like I say, even if after this exploration you say monogamy is not right or monogamy is right for me, I don't want to deal with non-monogamy. That's not something I'm interested in. I hope that you find a happier relationship status and a happier sense of self having thought about these things and perhaps explored them. So now we'll explore these with what I hope will be an open mind for you so that you can see some, not all, of course, in this hour or so of time together. Of course, you can't go into all of the forms of non monogamy, but at least we'll be able to explore a few of them. So, again, to sort of ground our conversation and understand why we may be talking about it, we need to think about a few factors. I've already discussed how more and more people are exploring non monogamy. So even if it is not for you, you're going to be confronted with it in your life as you meet people, and perhaps that's what brought you to this particular video, you're gonna be confronted with it, because more and more it is a relationship. There are relationship styles that are non-monogamous that people are exploring. But also, I'm hoping that you will consider it for yourself, because people today have generally, especially in straight communities, been taught that monogamy is the norm. It's what our culture tells us everyone does, even if they don't do it. As I've already discussed, oftentimes monogamy hasn't been the norm, but we've been told it was the norm. Even if we know that 50% of people today have explored some type of non monogamy, our culture presents that as uh, a rare alternative and something that it doesn't condone. It presents monogamy as just what you do, right? You're monogamous, you meet your partner, you get married, you have children, and you grow old together. And that's what you're quote unquote supposed to do. Any deviation from that is seen as some sort of perhaps moral failure, or at the very least, a failure in a relationship. So, for instance, when a couple perhaps is married, has 20 years of happy marriage, and then decides that in their 21st, 22nd year, they're less happy, and in their 23rd, 24th year decides to end that relationship, for some reason, it's seen as a failure. The divorce is seen as a failure in life, when in fact, 20 years of happy marriage isn't a failure, it's 20 years of happiness. And ending that and moving on to something else that makes you happy may, in fact, be a sign of moral strength, right? It might be a sign that a person has the moral fortitude to make a decision that's going to make them, perhaps their children, perhaps even their former partner, happier than they would be to just simply slog out the next 20 years of a relationship that they really don't want to be in, or don't want to be in that way. Perhaps they'd be better as friends, or better as distant family members, rather than thinking of them as their one romantic sexual partner. Because relationship dissatisfaction is common. Um, in particular, in longer term partnerships, people often are unhappy. While we can look at the particular statistics on divorce, and we could look at those and see, the exact numbers. Large numbers of people stay in their relationships and end up being less happy than they would be if they ended those relationships. We know that most women, in particular, who end a monogamous relationship end up happier than they would have been if they had continued in that monogamous relationship long term. That's at least most women who are considering a divorce end up being happier if they actually go through with that divorce than if they stay. Again, I'm not telling everybody that divorce is the right answer for their particular problem, but I do want us to question this idea that you have to stick with it. Sticking with a relationship and staying in it something that's unhappy is the right thing to do. In fact, re-examining that, maybe ending the relationship, maybe changing the relationship, maybe moving into other additional relationships, are all possibilities for making a happier life for you. Because in the end, often we think there are certain boxes we have to check to be successful in life. And one of those boxes is to find your romantic partner and have a lifelong relationship with that one person. That, in fact, may be something that makes you happy, and that does work out for some people. Obviously, there are wonderful romantic stories of partnerships that met, lasted a lifetime, in which both people were fully engaged and fully um, satisfied with that relationship. So, of course, it's possible, but we know that that's less likely than people getting in a relationship, maybe being happy for a while, and then becoming unhappy in some way, and rather than exploring ways to change that or exploring ways to grow, they continue in their unhappiness. And often their unhappiness grows and grows. And then we see other things that can be destructive, such as cheating, or even worse, suicide. Things or perhaps worst of all, continuing on in an unhappy life because you feel bound to stay in a particular relationship. So again, we need to think about alternative relationships as possibilities for us, because when we consider them as a possibility, it doesn't mean we're going to necessarily move in this or that direction, but it does allow us to feel that autonomy over our own life. And in fact, having explored those possibilities, one result may be continuing in a monogamous relationship, but being happier because you know that you're not there because you have to be, but you're there in that particular type of relationship style because that's what you want in your life. So, first, when we consider relationship options, we need to consider monogamy as an option. Again, my goal here is not to discredit monogamy. My goal here is to move monogamy from the default norm, which is what you're supposed to do, to one option among many. Now, having said that, we need to take a look at what that means. Monogamy typically involves two particular types of exclusivity: sexual exclusivity and romantic, emotional exclusivity. But even in monogamy, the boundaries of what it means to be romantically exclusive or sexually exclusive are somewhat vague. We all know certain couples who have very strong boundaries around monogamy that include things like never looking at another person sexually or trying to avoid doing so. That include things like never being alone in the same room with somebody else or not having friendships with other people. I'm not a licensed counselor and wouldn't give in-depth mental health or relationship advice because that would be out of my area. But I will say that it seems to me that as monogamy becomes so strictly enforced, it can lead to really severe health or mental health outcomes and also can negatively affect the happiness of that monogamous relationship. For instance, it seems to me that a monogamous relationship where one can't even sexually um, explore possibilities in the mind, they can't fantasize about sex with somebody else, or they can't emotionally connect with anyone of the opposite sex, if assuming this is a heterosexual, which typically these are heterosexual norms that I'm talking about here. Um, that just seems impossible. In some ways, it dehumanizes other people. If I can't even have a friendship with another woman because I'm married to this woman, then that sort of devalues every other woman to me just wanting them for sex, and so I can't have a relationship. So again, I would have some concerns about those sorts of relationship structures, but nonetheless, there's a wide range of what people consider acceptable and what people consider unacceptable. For instance, having a best friend of the, assuming this is a heterosexual couple, a best friend of the opposite sex. What does that mean? What sorts of things can be shared and not shared? What sorts of emotional entanglement are possible? Sexually, what is considered cheating? Can somebody go out and go out with their friends and dance and maybe kiss somebody else? Is that allowed? Is pornography viewing something that you're comfortable with? So there, even within monogamy, my point is there are a wide range of boundaries, but generally there's some line, both sexually and emotionally, past which people say this is no longer acceptable. You can have these emotional relationships, but not to this degree. You can have these sexual thoughts, but you can't act on them, or you can only act on them in these specific ways. So again, even in monogamy, there are questions that have to be answered in terms of what is acceptable and what is not acceptable. But that said, most of our culture provides some pretty good boundaries for that, or at least some pretty, maybe not good boundaries, but pretty clear boundaries for that. Right? We know when a person says they're married that generally, if they're in a monogamous marriage, that means that they're not going to kiss people other than their partner. Culturally, we've been taught that that's generally something monogamous married people don't do. We know that they may have friends of the opposite sex, but that going on a vacation with two people of the opposite sex would be considered atypical. And again, I'm not saying this is the way it should be. I'm saying that our society gives us these general guidelines that we all know and we all operate under as members of our society. So again, we know that yes, you might have a colleague at work that you call your work wife, and maybe that's fine in our society. But at a certain point, if you decide to go take your work wife on a vacation to Hawaii, people would probably say, wait a minute, this feels like it's violating our culturally established norms. So our culture gives us these general guidelines about what's supposed to happen. And as a result, you were probably formed with those deep inside of you. They probably feel comfortable to you in some way because that's what you were raised to believe. Before you reflect on something, something is just normal, whether it's good or bad. As we know, there are children who grow up in horribly abusive situations, but because that's the norm, their nervous system expects that in life, and that's what they do. And so, those of us who grew up seeing monogamy as the norm, even if non monogamy was happening behind closed doors, we grow up to think my partner is supposed to love me and love me only because that's what we were told. My partner is supposed to share things with me that they don't share with other people because that's important. My partner is supposed to think of me sexually more than anybody else and maybe only about me. Or maybe if they do think about somebody else, it should be very fleeting and very, very minimal because their sexual interest should be with me and primarily with me, and I should meet all of their sexual needs. So these are things that we just learn growing up. And that makes it easier for us to live with in some ways. It doesn't mean it makes us the best fit for us, but for most of us, because that's the way we were raised, that's what we accept as normal. That's what our nervous system accepts as normal. So if we do choose another relationship style, our nervous system might become very activated when we see a partner saying, I want to do this thing with somebody else, but not with you. That might become really activating, really triggering. Now, notice it's not necessarily triggering in other settings, right? It's not triggering if your best friend says, oh, I really like to golf with Bob because Bob and I are working on our swing, but maybe you and I can, hang out later at the bar and have a drink. Right? We're probably, oh, fine. He wants to work on the swing with Bob. I mean, it might hurt our feelings, but it probably doesn't. And if it does, it's very brief, and we just get over it, right? We might be used to a sibling, having a certain type of relationship with another sibling they don't have with us, and that's fine. That's just their relationship. It's never my relationship with them. But in romantic and sexual areas, those things are all very activating. Seeing that your partner has some sort of sexual encounter with somebody else they don't have with you becomes very activating because you were taught, you were enculturated, that culture was put inside you your whole life to think this is scary and bad. Whereas having siblings have various interests they don't share with you is taught as normal. So, one of the advantages to monogamy is in many ways it's easier. Your whole culture's been set up to be monogamous. And this extends to things like getting a mortgage. It extends to things like parenting, legal forms. Right? All these frameworks are set up to be sometimes called a plus one culture. Right? You and your partner. And you can get insurance for one partner. You can bring one partner to your friend's party or the work party. You can have one person named as your beneficiary. Right? There's a one, or at least one primary person named as the beneficiary. There's this one partner plus one culture that is expected, and it makes monogamy easier in many ways logistically than non-monogamy is, just because everything's set up for it. So as I've said, a lot of cultural support, a lot of simple logistics, and it provides the opportunity to have a really deep connection with one person with fewer obstacles than you would have in non monogamy. Obviously, you have a limit on your time, right? Even though your ability to love is unlimited, as you know, if you have more than one child, you didn't stop loving one child because you had a second. Your ability to love is not limited, but your time is certainly limited. And if you have 10 children, it's harder to spend one on one time than it is if you have two children. Well, the same can happen with partnerships. While it's true that your love and the amount of love you have doesn't change if you have more than one partner, the amount of time you have also doesn't change. And so you might find that it's harder to have a deep focus with one person. Again, monogamy doesn't ensure that you will have that. There are plenty of people who are monogamous but spend all of their time with their children and none with their partner, or who are monogamous but spend all of their time with their siblings but none with their partner, or who spend time with their partner but aren't emotionally available. So I don't want you to think monogamy necessarily creates a deep connection. It doesn't. But it does have the opportunity for a deep connection that can sometimes be more difficult in non-monogamy when you're splitting up your time and splitting up your energies. But of course, there are a lot of cons to monogamy. We know that people get bored. We know that emotional stagnation can happen, as well as sexual stagnation. Um, People spend a lot of time trying to figure out how to spice up a bedroom that they've been sharing with somebody for 20 years. Um, a matter of fact, that might be what brought you here, right? A lot of people consider non-monogamy because it creates this excitement in their own relationship. So that's one of the things that you could be doing by exploring non-monogamy. But we know that that's a pretty normal occurrence, and even very happy, very satisfying relationships for the sexual chemistry to be something that's challenging to maintain long term, and the emotional connection to maintain that. And by the way, sometimes those two things inversely relate to one another. Some people think, well, if we're emotionally connected, we will automatically be really sexually connected. But there's a lot of research actually showing that sometimes people who are really close emotionally struggle more sexually because that emotional intimacy triggers feelings that are not sexual, like you're emotionally intimate with your children, you're not sexual. You're emotionally intimate with your parents, you're not sexual. So those familial feelings that you might get after having a partner that you've loved for 25 years might sometimes cause less sexual attraction. So humans are complicated, and it's not, unfortunately, this sort of one size do this XYZ and you will have a happy marriage, right? Or have a happy long-term committed monogamous relationship. In fact, we know that it's not the case, that these are really complex. And then also we can find in monogamy sometimes some unrealistic expectations. I've already discussed the ideas of really, really strict boundaries in monogamy, sometimes creating unrealistic expectations. If you have an expectation your partner will never sexually fantasize about someone else, the research shows that's a really unrealistic expectation. And also, if you enforce that expectation, it might often have a sort of unexpected consequence that your partner will be less sexually attracted to you. We do know that, in particularly with some research on women, that when their partners are really sexually require this sort of level of like never think about anything else, don't read anything about other people, never think sexually about other people, that can sort of shut down the person's entire sexuality. And so when it's time to be sexual in that monogamous relationship, it can actually be harder than if that person thought of themselves as a sexual being in general first, and then as a sexual being in this monogamous relationship. So unrealistic expectations, whether they're romantic, whether they're sexual, can be really difficult in monogamy because they can often lead to a lack of happiness. This idea that one person is going to be my one-stop shop for everything in my life simply doesn't bear out in the literature. No matter how good of a partner I want to be, I'm one person, right? And even if I want to be the most sexually adventurous person, I'm still one person. And even if I try to be as emotionally supportive as I can be and listen and give feedback and be interesting, and I'm still one person. And so monogamous ideals often put everything on one person. And that one person often can't meet all of those ideals. I mean, if you just think about it, the person who's the most sexually adventurous, sort of, gives you all of the sort of, risque feelings, might not be the same person who also causes you to feel super safe and comfortable expressing, your deepest, darkest fears. But in a monogamous culture, we're told you have to be both. You need to be their sexual, everything as well as their emotional everything. And these unrealistic expectations they often don't bear out well in the real world. Of course, I do recognize that there are monogamous practices that are different than that. I do recognize that many monogamous people don't try to make their partner their everything, and they have satisfying other relationships that meet their various needs, and they may have a satisfying sexual fantasy life that they meet on their own, and these are all really positive developments for those monogamous couples. But sometimes in monogamy, this unrealistic expectation takes hold and takes over the relationship in a way that's really unhealthy to both partners and their happiness. And then, of course, we see high rates of infidelity. For all the reasons I've just talked about, people often step out of their relationships to meet their needs. And while I'm not at all condoning people doing so, I think we need to be more honest than simply saying these are bad people. Because, in fact, I think we all probably know some really good people who were unfaithful. And of course, dishonesty, of course, not keeping your commitments, of course, possibly bringing in sexual risks into a relationship are all practices that I don't encourage, and are all practices that I definitely don't advise. We do know that it happens because people are living their life and trying to meet their needs, and as they do so, it can sometimes be complicated. And the fact that we have such high rates of infidelity in men and women, and in I don't know the research on non-binary people, but my expectation with non-binary people as well, because we have them, I think we need to really consider whether or not this monogamous framework that we're given, this monogamous expectation and norm, is really a one size fits all ideal that we can expect to live out. I think instead we might need to consider that different types of people need different types of relationship structures in order to live their best life. So, as I've mentioned, cheating, it can often be the dark side of monogamy. And cheating doesn't always occur because there's a lack of love. In fact, a lot of the research on cheating actually shows that people who cheat love their partner very much. In both, there's also some evidence that discounts these heteronormative ideas that like men cheat just for sex because they want to stay in their marriage, and women cheat because they want to leave. There's the data on it are much more scattered than that, but the data do consistently show that many people who cheat absolutely love their partner and absolutely don't want to leave. Again, that's not to discount the dishonesty and the breach of commitment and the possible dangers that cheating can bring into a relationship. But we also need to be careful about thinking about any behavior as if there's something just purely evil about it. Instead, we need to think about why people cheat. And often it involves a desire to get something that the person wants in their life. Um, and it, in some ways, the thing that they're looking for or want often has nothing to do with their partner. Now, of course, that doesn't mean it doesn't affect their partner. That doesn't mean it might be devastating for their partner, but the thing that the individual is doing when they decide to cheat or they end up cheating after a series of decisions, might be a desire for a different connection, a desire for exploration of themselves and who they are outside of their relationship with their partner. It might be a desire for novelty. It might be a desire for sex that they're not having. It might be a desire for a specific type of sex that they're not having. It might be the excitement of feeling a part of themselves that they haven't felt for years in the past in a monogamous relationship. Um, so cheating is a form of non-monogamy, but it's an unethical form of non-monogamy. And often it can be one of the most difficult places to begin a non-monogamous journey. Unfortunately, it is often a place where people do start non-monogamy. A person recognizes, for instance, that there's something that they would like from a different relationship apart from their monogamous relationship, and then after their cheating is either exposed or they are honest about their cheating or whatever, the discussion could then be to say, "I don't want to lose you." It might be with that monogamous partner to say, "I love you, I want to stay with you, and I want these other things. I say that because, not because it's impossible to start non-monogamy from that place, but because it is a very difficult place. Obviously, cheating is difficult. Whether you decide to stay in a monogamous relationship with a person who cheated on you, that's a difficult decision. It's a decision a lot of people make, by the way. This idea that somebody cheats and then the partner leaves them, that is not what often happens. So even though our culture perpetuates that myth, he cheats, he's always a cheater, leaves, she cheats, she's good for nothing, leave. The truth behind that and the evidence behind that are that many people stay. And by the way, many people stay in that monogamous relationship and are happier than they were before. Again, I'm not saying cheating is a way to help your relationship. I'm saying cheating can result in a type of self-exploration and relationship exploration that can lead to greater fulfillment as a result of that exploration. I'm not saying cheating is some sort of wonderful way to move a relationship forward. It's not. But it's going to be hard, right, to keep going in that monogamous relationship. It's going to cause a period of turmoil and stress and a lot of healing. And then if you decide to leave that person and start a new monogamous relationship, it's going to be difficult. Cheating is still going to have an effect on you emotionally, and the trauma that it caused. If you cheated or your partner cheated, it's going to be difficult. And then, of course, if you move into non-monogamy with that original partner, so one of you cheat in the original relationship, and then as a result, you decide to move into non-monogamy, that's going to be particularly difficult. I don't have experience myself, although I've certainly talked to people who have been in that situation. And I will say, I encourage you to heal as much as possible and to evaluate yourself and what you want and evaluate that relationship, exploring therapy as much as you are able and can afford to really figure out if moving to non-monogamy is the step that you want. Because sometimes it's not. And because you're going to be dealing with the aftermath of cheating, and because moving from monogamy to non-monogamy is very difficult, I'm going to talk a lot about that. Having to move from monogamy to non-monogamy at the same time you're dealing with the aftermath of cheating is a very difficult place to be. And it is a very emotionally and interpersonally difficult journey to navigate. And again, I'm not going to give direct mental health advice. I can't do that. I can just say from my experience, people often go through a lot of heartache when they very quickly try to move into non-monogamy from monogamy, which is tough. At the same time, they're trying to work through what it means to have either been unfaithful or to have experienced the infidelity of a partner, because a lot of the same emotional triggers get brought up. And if you have recently been in a relationship where someone was unfaithful, many of those triggers are going to be amplified when you then move into non-monogamy. Even though the non-monogamy is consensual, even though you're being non-monogamous with this partner and you're consenting to it, emotionally you're still pushing a lot of the same buttons. And so again, I don't mean that it's impossible to move from non-monogamy from monogamy to non-monogamy after cheating, but I will say it is a particularly difficult move to make, and I encourage you to make it as slowly and thoughtfully as possible. So having said all of that about monogamy, about the pros and the cons, and about cheating, which is the dark side of monogamy and often can be a way that people end up in the non-monogamous space. Let's talk about some options within non-monogamy. The first option that people take is in the realm that is called swinging, or sometimes called the lifestyle. So swinging or the lifestyle involves typically a couple who is inviting shared sexual experiences into their relationship. Now, of course, that's an oversimplification. But The emphasis is on the couple in the lifestyle world in general, the single couple that is prioritized and is generally emotionally more or less monogamous, though they are sexually non-monogamous. And by that I mean generally that couple operates as a unit where they often are a married couple, don't have to be, but that couple is the primary relationship, and the sexual activity that goes on outside of that relationship is seen as part of that relationship, right? So even if, for instance, you have a situation where perhaps there's a man who enjoys his wife, and again, I'm using heterosexual norms here just because, uh, well, frankly, a lot of the queer world has already experienced this and could do a better job at sort of teaching this than I could. But let's use a heteronormative sort of example. You have a man who enjoys his wife having sex with other people, and maybe he's not even there when she does it. Maybe she goes off and goes off for the weekend with some other guy, or goes out on dates with some other guy, has sex with him, and comes back. That experience that the woman is having is still seen as part of her relationship with the man that she is with. And by the way, if the first time you're hearing this might sound wild to you, but oftentimes this happens actually as a result of a person experiencing infidelity. So a man might have a wife who cheats. That might be a very erotic feeling for him, or maybe he never experienced infidelity, but it's always been an erotic feeling. And as a result, he enjoys the eroticism of his wife being with somebody else when he's not there, or maybe when he is, or maybe getting a video, whatever, and then coming back, and then reuniting, and then enjoying the sexual energy that experience brought. So the couple remains the primary unit, even though other experiences are happening. Or it might be that there's a couple who has another set of friends who are a couple, and the two couples swap partners, perhaps in the same room, perhaps in separate rooms, perhaps a full swap with full intercourse, or perhaps soft swap where there's just kissing, or perhaps other sexual play but not intercourse. There's just a variety of configurations that can happen, but the couple remains the primary focus. And generally, the other sexual relationships do not move past a level of friendship, or perhaps a little bit of a crush infatuation, but never to a level of commitment, or to a level of pure, of full romantic exploration, right? Because the one couple and their romantic and sexual needs remain the primary needs, and everything else sort of remains secondary to that couple. Um, so it's important to understand that in the lifestyle and the swinging, that is the sort of the primary unit is the couple. Now that doesn't mean that there are no single men, single women, single non-binary people who are involved. Of course, there can be other people that get involved, but even in their involvement, they generally recognize that it's the couple that's the primary unit. So there might be a man who serves in the role that sometimes called the role of a bull, which is a single man who has sexual relationships with women who are married or in other committed relationships. And even in that situation, they go in knowing that they're entering in some ways into the relationship of another person and fulfilling a role. And it might be a very sexually exciting role for them. It might be a very gratifying role. And of course, they may have friendships with these couples. It might, move past sort of just a one-time sexual relationship. But they do understand that it is the couple remains the primary unit, and their fun, their exploration, their bond is sort of the primary unit, and the single people are entering in sort of a secondary way. So that's what typically happens in the lifestyle or the swinging world. But there are a variety of ways that this can actually play out, in different ways it can be configured. So there are a wide variety of possible dynamics that people who are in the lifestyle might engage in. These are only a few. Again, I've given primarily dynamics that I know from heterosexual couples in lifestyle, although you'll see some other variations. And of course, um, a lot of what people in lifestyle learn, they actually learned from the queer community, which was already engaged in some of these behaviors. The first, the hot wife cuckold dynamic, is the idea of a woman enjoying sexual experiences with other men, and the man in that couple with her receiving sexual gratification from watching her or knowing she's having those experiences. Now, the word cuckold can sometimes be a derogatory term because some men enjoy that feeling of sort of powerlessness and the feeling of sort of almost humiliation or sometimes straight out humiliation, especially by seeing their partner in a sexual situation that they may not be able to do themselves. Um, there's the idea of bringing a dragon into a relationship. A dragon is different from a bull, which I mentioned earlier. A bull is typically a straight man who interacts with a woman in a dynamic, whereas a dragon might be is generally a bisexual man who interacts with both the man and woman in an otherwise heterosexual relationship. Um, there can be full swap with other couples, which is where one couple meets another couple, and then they swap partners, so to speak, and they may do that same room or different room play, or they might prefer to be in the same room with their partner and have sexual relations with somebody else, or the couple might switch and go to different rooms because they might find it distracting to see their partner with somebody else, and they would rather enjoy the experience with this new person and then afterward come back with their partner and talk about it and enjoy the sexual excitement of having had sexual experiences with other people. But the emphasis is on that excitement, that reconnection, right? Typically in swinging, the other experiences are secondary to the primary couple. And that's the unique thing about swinging because you can have other types of non-monogamy which operate differently. And so you need to be aware of what people are doing in these non-monogamous relationships because it's important that people are people are able to consent to the type of relationship they're entering into. If a person thinks that you have an open marriage, let's say, and by that they think you are open to having another partner who has the same emotional, sexual role that the partner that the other your other current partner has, but then it turns out that you're actually not doing that. You're really just going to have a couple of sexual experiences with them and then discard them. Maybe discard's a strong word, but you don't intend to have a partnership with them. You want to have a few sexual experiences, and then maybe that'll fizzle out, or maybe it'll continue, but just as a sexual experience on the side, never as a sort of fulfilling partnership. That's okay, but people need to know that's what you're looking for, and they need to understand that that's what you're bringing into the relationship, and that's the type of relationship they are going to experience. What's unfair is when they think that one thing is happening, but actually you have a different set of expectations. That's not ethical non-monogamy. That person isn't able to consent because you're actually offering them a different type of relationship than they thought. So in the swinging world, the general expectation is the couple's primary. Anything else is secondary and is very limited to whatever it is that the couple wants and whatever it is that the couple is looking for as an agreed upon negotiation. Another type of relationship that we see often in non-monogamous communities is a BDSM structured relationship. A full introduction and explanation of BDSM would be beyond sort of the limits and the expectations of what I'm going to do here. But I do want to talk about it because you do see it in the lifestyle, the swinging community, as well as in a lot of polyamorous circles. Bondage, discipline, submission, and mastery, or sometimes bondage, discipline, sadism, and masochism are where the BDSM words come from. And there may be other variations of that acronym that I'm not thinking of. But the idea is a power exchange. The idea is that some people really enjoy um, giving power, whether it's sexual power, not always, or other type of power to another person, so that that other person can then make decisions for them. Broadly speaking, this puts one person in the dominant role and another person in the submissive role. There are lots of variations on that. Some people like to have the idea of a master and a slave, where the master has full control over that person's body. We're going to talk about that. When I say full control, there's an asterisk there because I want to talk about that a little bit. Some people enjoy a sort of daddy baby girl relationship, or daddy or mommy baby boy relationship, maybe, or there are non-binary options as well. But this idea where there's sort of a really caring, loving person who has power and makes decisions, and then another person who likes to feel that protection and power, but with a lot of love and a lot of gentle care. And there are lots of other varieties. I can't explain all of them right now. The key here is consent, right? These are consensual relationships. So I mentioned the idea of a master and slave, which is one of the sort of more extreme forms of this, meaning there's more power given, where the master might make decisions on when somebody eats, what they eat, how much they eat, what they wear, and so forth. Um, those sorts of relationships still are based on consent, because it's important that both the dominant and the submissive consent to the relationship, and at any time can withdraw their consent. So at any time the submissive can say, I withdraw my consent. I will not do that. The thing you've just told me you want me to do, or you've asked me to do, or ordered me to do, or commanded me to do, I will not do. Right? Even if it was agreed upon before that they would do it, they can withdraw their consent at any time. So again, in some ways, these relationships are acting, because obviously the person who's the submissive can at any time say no. But on the other hand, they're very real, because that submissive gives away that power in a very real way, and then allows that dominant to then act that out. Oftentimes, this can include relationships with multiple partners, in particular as it overlaps with the swinging world. So I mentioned earlier, you might have the idea of a hot wife and a cuckold, where the hot wife has these sexual explorationships, and the man often is sort of humiliated and feels powerless. But on the other end, you could have a relationship where the man views the woman, and again, I'm using a male female example here. It doesn't have to be, but the man views the woman as their sexual property that they can lend out to others, and they get joy out of feeling like they have this property that they can share with other people. And then the submissive enjoys that feeling of being sexual property and being enjoyed, right? And the dominant might feel pride in having something that's so sexually valuable, and then giving it to others, and exploring that together. So you'll often see these in non-consent. I'm sorry, yes, consensual, non-monogamous consensual relationships. And so I bring this up because this is these types of relationship structures which you should enter into with much care, much discussion, and much discernment. If you're interested in these, they are things you're gonna show up that are going to show up if you're in the lifestyle very long. Um, I just must caution people who are interested in these to be very, very aware and become very knowledgeable before they move forward. Because when you give somebody power over you, there's the opportunity for abuse. So vetting who you're going to give power to, or who you're going to take power, receive power from, I shouldn't say take, but receive power from, vetting them, having a long discussion, having long processes, making sure that consent is understood, making sure that you understand how a person could withdraw their consent, understanding the things they like and don't like, and what the boundaries are, what they do consent to and don't consent to. All of these things are really important, and they take time. So if you're interested in this, and some of you may be seeing this for the first time, and I will be clear, you may be ashamed that you're interested in this, because these sorts of things are things you've probably been taught not to think about. Most people who start exploring uh, non-traditional relationship styles, come from, you know, maybe perhaps feminist backgrounds where, the autonomy of a woman and the autonomy of every person is really important. And the idea of empowerment is really important. So these ideas that might seem to negate that, they don't actually negate that, because be clear, everybody involved has full power and is fully in control of what's happening to them and what they're being part of. But they feel like they don't, and they feel like these are taboo things. You shouldn't want somebody to tell you what to do. You shouldn't want some mistress ordering you around because men are supposed to be dominant, or you shouldn't let a man control you because women are supposed to be empowered now. Whatever it is, there's a lot of shame involved. So when you have these opportunities, you might rush into one of these relationships. Be very careful, because there are a lot of people who don't understand them, who are out there seeking to take advantage of people. So again, there are plenty of wonderful dominants, men and women, and non-binary dominants in the world, as well as submissives. But you can find those people carefully with vetting, with lots of discussion. You're not going to find them by immediately connecting with somebody who demands that you call them sir or madam, and you pay them $50. Right? Again, I laugh at that, but I'm not shaming the kink. I'm not shaming the interest. I'm shaming the idea that you could just develop that so quickly, because that can very often lead to abuse. Talked about swinging and BDSM relationships. We can talk about a different form, a different approach to non-monogamy, which is approach that rather than centering a couple, centers the individual. This approach, non-monogamy, is known as polyamory. Now, I need to warn you, oftentimes in the media, you see people talk about polyamory as a throuple, right? It's a couple, a man, generally a heterosexual man and woman, that quote bring in a third into their relationship, and then that third, usually a woman, a unicorn, there's sometimes called, sort of becomes their partner, and then they have a relationship between the three of them. That does happen in polyamory. It's very rare, and it is a form of polyamory that is one of those difficult forms. That idea that a couple is going to bring in a third for one night of swinging, that makes sense. That often works out beautifully for everybody involved. It's rare to find a single woman that wants that, but it works out. So a unicorn in the swinging world can be quite successful, but in the polyamory world, that type of relationship is actually very rare and often does not come about. Often, that ends in a lot of heartbreak, because when you bring in, quote, a third, that person is inherently already less valuable. You have two people that are in a committed relationship, and the third person is less than. And then if they become equal, then oftentimes the two people in the primary relationship feel bad because now they feel threatened, and then they want this person to remain third, but that person's falling in love and wants to be equal, and all sorts of problems evolve. So I say that only to remind you, be really careful about what you see on TV and thinking that's the primary way to do polyamory. Some versions also involve two couples, original couples, coming together to form a quad, four people that are together. Again, that's really rare. Those types of developments where a couple merges with another person to form a triad, or another couple, those are what I call sort of polyamory on steroids. They're the most difficult ways to sort of move into the polyamorous space. Instead, I think we need to think about polyamory as the individual as the center, and each individual creating and establishing multiple partnerships and relationships that are each unique. They don't all have to be the same. You could have one partnership where you've shared property, you have kids together, and another partner that you only see, once a week because maybe they live an hour away. Or maybe you have two partners that you live with, but you also see a couple of other partners who live with other people. Or maybe they live alone. Or maybe you live alone, but you have several partners that you see 2 or 3 times a week. Or maybe that you see every day. You go to their house to eat, and another one you have lunch with. Or maybe you all come together. There are just so many varieties. But the point of polyamory is different from swinging. In swinging, it's a couple that's the center, and they can, quote, bring in others. That's swinging. In polyamory, it's the individual who has multiple connections. Autonomy and the individuality is the key, and what the individual desires is the key. This doesn't mean all of their relationships are the same. It doesn't mean they all have equal time commitments, equal relationship commitments, equal financial commitments. They can be vastly different. But the individual is choosing autonomously in polyamory. So, this is a transition that can be very difficult for monogamous people, a monogamous couple in particular, to move into. Because when you move from monogamy, where a couple is making decisions for one another, prioritizing one another's needs, often there's a lot of codependence involved. By codependence, I mean not really saying what it is that you want as an individual, but instead trying to figure out what's good for your partner. Maybe not being fully honest about what you want because you don't hurt your partner's feelings. Maybe making some concessions for your partner. In polyamory, you're going to have multiple partners that you're going to love, and you're going to have multiple connections that are both sexual and romantic. And you can't do that because one partner might want to live with you and another partner might want to live with you, and you might want to live alone. Or you might be living with one partner who doesn't want to live with anybody else, and another partner might want to live with you, and then you've got to decide, what do you want to do? Because it's no longer about just what one particular partner wants. It's no longer about a couple, it's about you as an individual and multiple relationships. So it's very important that when you consider moving from monogamy to non-monogamy, you recognize you are not doing this as a couple. It doesn't mean your partnership's ending. I want to be clear. You're still a couple. You're still in a relationship. But when you move into polyamory, you are now saying, I am polyamorous. I am going to have multiple relationships. I accept that my other partners, including this one that I've had a relationship with, is going to have their own relationships. Sometimes those relationships' desires and needs are not going to be the same as what I want. Sometimes there's going to be commitments and challenges, but instead of saying, you're my partner, you've got to do what I want, you say, you're an autonomous individual. Let's talk about what I want. And I know you love me and I love you. And let's see where we can come up with some compromises and agreements. But in the end, you do what you want to do, what's authentic to you, even if that means something I don't like. And I'm going to do the same. Again, this is not saying I don't love my partner. This is not saying I'm selfish and just do what I want. That's not polyamory. Some people think that's polyamory, but that's really just being a jerk. Instead, it's recognizing the various needs, but still prioritizing the individual. Honestly, we know how to do this sort of stuff. We just don't usually do it in our romantic relationships. We teach our children to do these things. We teach our kids to say, if you're a good parent, right? Oh, I know your sister wants to play. Maybe you can play with them a little bit, but in the end, you get to choose what's best for you. You don't have to just always do what your sister tells you to do. You don't always have to, to do what your sister says. Even though you love your sister, you can still say no, right? We're not used to that in our romantic relationships. That I can say, actually, no, I don't want to have that kind of sex with you, but I'm going to have it with this person, but I don't want it with you. And that's okay. But again, we have the skills. We teach our kids to do this. We do this in our friendships. We do this in our family relationships. It's just moving that skill into romantic relationships, which is very difficult because we're used to centering the couple. So many couples who move into polyamory do it incorrectly because they think my partner and I are going to become polyamorous. And then my partner and I are going to establish rules for how often you can see other people, what you can do with those people, what types of sex you can have, where you can go, how often you can see each other, what kind of words you can use to talk about your relationship. This is bound to fail because the moment you start to fall in love with other people, you're going to want autonomy to develop that relationship. You're not going to want this other relationship, no matter how much you love them, to tell you this is what you have to do with these other people. And so instead, you need to recognize from the beginning, you become polyamorous as an individual. You can continue relationships that are also polyamorous. You can continue to love and support and help and talk to and come to agreements with other people. But in the end, it's not you and your original partner that become polyamorous together. When you become polyamorous, you do that individually. They don't get to control you. You don't get to control them. Polyamory has its own pros and cons. On the one hand, you get the freedom to explore a variety of deep, loving connections. I remember, this is probably the only time I'll share a personal story here, but I remember the first time after my long term marriage, my long term monogamous marriage, with no infidelity, my long term marriage, for the first time I had an emotional connection with another person. I felt alive again in a way that I hadn't felt alive. Again, I was very happily married. I want to be clear. I'm not saying my marriage was bad. It wasn't at all. But I hadn't felt that part of me that, are they going to text me back? Do they like me? Do they feel the same way about me? Oh my goodness, they like me. Oh, they said they liked my shirt. Oh, I'll wear that shirt again. Like, these are things I hadn't felt since I was a teenager, because I fell in love as a teenager and got married in my early 20s. So, that freedom to explore is exciting. And it does provide an energy that's difficult to get with other types of relationships. And of course, it provides this wide network of support. When you have developed multiple developed partnerships, um, you have other people who can support you. It's not just the monogamous me and you. So when one partner is experiencing hardship, you have another partner there to help you. God forbid you lose a partner through separation or death, you have another partner who's there to support you. You have multiple people that can help you, maybe financially, certainly emotionally, maybe with your kids, maybe with work problems. With all these areas of life, you have multiple people that can support you. Again, any happy, fulfilled adult already experiences some of that, because you already have various relationships with friends and family and people who support you. If you don't, you're probably struggling, and you should probably see somebody to help you just get to that point before you even consider other romantic relationships. But when you have these romantic relationships, it's an even deeper level of connection than you probably have with most of your friends. And as a result, you get not only the excitement and the joy of exploring, but also this deep connection and deep level of support. That said, there are a lot of challenges. Our culture does not support polyamory primarily, right, as a way of living. So how do you organize your household? How do you have kids with different partners that you still love at the same time? How do you manage your time? How do you tell your kids who may be made fun of at school? How do you tell your family who may have religious disagreements? How do you deal with your own internalized mononormativity, we call it, that monogamous mindset that you've got inside? How do you deal with that? How do you deal with the guilt you may have from religion that perhaps enforces or encourages monogamy? These are all factors that are not to be discounted. Additionally, a transition from a monogamous relationship to a polyamorous relationship is extremely difficult. I wish I could tell you something else. I wish I could say, it's really not so bad. You take a few classes, talk to a therapist a couple times, you'll be fine. I have not found that to be the case. I have found everyone who has moved from monogamous to polyamorous relationship structure to struggle. Um, I say everyone. I'm trying to think if there are exceptions, but I don't think there have been. And I will say nearly everyone has struggled to a profound degree, because so much of our culture, so much of the structures we're used to, so much of the way we're used to doing relationship is based on monogamy, that the challenges that occur as you watch a partner who you love fall in love with someone else. Um, at first, that can be really hard. I'm not saying it's always hard. For some people, it becomes not hard. For some people, there will always be struggles. Jealousy is a normal emotion. We experience jealousy with our friends and with our kids and with our siblings. You're going to experience jealousy, even if you're great at polyamory. Jealousy is real. Um, but our culture in other areas teaches us how to deal with jealousy. Like, we learn how to have a best friend who gets a new best friend and how to deal with that. We know how to feel jealous, but know it's still okay. Know that we're not really losing our friend and just have a new friend. It's fine. We know how to do that in other areas, but our culture tells us in romance it is bad. When your partner falls in love with somebody else, you're losing something and it's hurting you. When your partner wants to do something with somebody they don't want to do with you, it's an insult to you. It's because you're not good enough. It's because you're not. We learn all these things from our culture that we have to unlearn in polyamory. Those things are not true. You could be an absolutely wonderful person, but your partner could still not want to do something with you that they do like doing with somebody else just because of whatever, because of your history, because of past experience, because they just found out they like it with a new person and they never did it with you. Whatever it is, you're going to experience some, if you move from monogamy to non-monogamy, some really jarring, really difficult emotions, and learning how to deal with those emotions as an individual without expecting your partner to manage them for you is very difficult for many people, because most of our society has encouraged us in monogamous relationships to be codependent, to say the right thing to make our partner feel better, to manage our partner's feelings. We do this. And like I said, in polyamory, you're not going to be able to do that because you're going to have more than one partner. And if you're trying to manage partner A's feelings and partner B's feelings at the same time, and I don't mean partner A is more important than B, I just labeling them differently, right? If you're trying to manage John's feelings and Bob's feelings at the same time, and they have feelings that contradict, you're going to find yourself really stressed because you might end up walking a tightrope for Bob and John and losing yourself and not actually getting what you want, right? Um, and it might just be impossible because Bob and John might want the same thing. Bob might want to go on vacation with you to Jamaica next year, and John might want to go on vacation with you to, I don't know, Barbados next year, but you've only got money to do one vacation, and you really don't want to do either. You really want to go on a girls' trip, with your friend, Stacy, right? How do you do that, right? How do you, or maybe you do have money for two, but you would just rather go with John to Barbados and not really Jamaica because you've already been. How do you do that? These things are tough. They're not impossible. Like I said, we already do this with our friendships, with our family relationships. We just have to learn how to do it with our romantic relationships, and that process of learning can be very difficult. It is usually very difficult for most people. Again, all that aside, you got to come out to people. You've got to deal with the religious persecution, the family persecution that often occurs, the persecution with your job, the possibility you could be fired because it's viewed as something deviant somehow. All of these things are possible in polyamory. And again, you may think that the things I'm talking about are not realistic. You might say, well, I just won't come out. I'll live in the closet until John tells you they don't like feeling like they're in the closet. John tells you they don't like feeling like a side piece. They want to feel like a primary part of your life, not a hidden part of your life. You might think, well, I don't need to tell my kids about this until John needs a place to live and you want John to move in with you. And now you're asking John to lie to your kids about who they are. That doesn't feel great. And your kids might find out anyway, and then your kids feel lied to, right? So a lot of times we come into polyamory thinking it'll be a small part of our life while we continue to live the rest of our life the way we always have. But love doesn't work that way. Love doesn't like to be kept in a closet. It doesn't like to be limited. It grows, it expands, it connects with other parts of your life. And as a result, when you move into polyamory, you will generally have to make room for the love that you're experiencing. And so there are hardships all along that road. And it would be disingenuous of me to not share the fact of that with you. So just to recap about polyamory, we're raised in a monogamous world that teaches us that our romantic relationship is different from all other relationships, that we should manage our partner's feelings because our partner belongs to us. So we should sacrifice ourselves to our partner. And if at any time we feel jealous or our partner feels jealous, we should change our behavior to stop their feeling of jealousy. In order to move into polyamory, you have to let go of that. Let go of the control of another person, the ownership of another person. Take on the control and ownership of yourself and take on the responsibility to be authentic about what it is that you want as a person with each relationship. which will be different and unique for each relationship. That's tough. And so again, I have this additional slide here and wanted to sort of reiterate it just so that you understand exactly what successful polyamory entails. Because trying to fit polyamory into an otherwise monogamous life is going to end in heartache. It could end in the heartache with your new relationships, or if you already have an established relationship that you're trying to open up, it could end in a lot of heartache with that relationship as well. So to recap, we have monogamy, which is a relationship style focused on one partner with exclusivity, with special emotional, sexual, often financial, commitment related aspects that are not shared with other partners. We have swinging, which focuses on the couple but still involves sexual variety and sexual exploration. We have BDM, which is often couple based, although not always, but that still explores this power dynamic, which can often include sexual exploration, exploration about different roles that you want to be in, either as a dominant or a sub or as a switch who does both roles. And then, of course, polyamory, which is emotional connection with multiple independent partnerships. And again, just to say independent partnerships, that idea that my partner and I, my one partner and I, my primary partner is going to bring in a third is a recipe for disaster, because that third is not going to want to stay a third because they're an independent person. They're going to want to have unique relationships with each person in the original dynamic. And those relationships are going to threaten the people in the individual dynamic. They're going to destabilize the individual dynamic. They're going to cause jealousy in the individual dynamic. So this idea that like, oh, my wife and I are going to open up and bring in a unicorn who's going to be our third, and we'll have a triad in our relationship, and I'm a guy, I'm going to have two women, and they're going to love each other and love me, is absolutely naive. Not because you can't have a triad with two women and a man, you certainly can, but they don't form by having a primary partnership that brings in a third. That doesn't work. In fact, it will result in people feeling hurt, people feeling secondary, people feeling lied to, people feeling like things are changing. Polyamory works when you do it as an individual. Sure, you might have an individual relationship with two women who also have an individual relationship with each other, and that would be a triad. But it doesn't result from two people bringing in a third as some sort of secondary subordinate person. So that's a little reminder. And I do want to add that there's an area of danger that people often get into, uh, which is, I've alluded to, but I call it the danger zone. And it happens between the swinging world and the polyamory world, where people say, well, I'm okay. My partner and I, we've opened our marriage, and I don't mind them going out and exploring with other people. I don't even mind if they, have emotional connections. But then those emotional connections grow. And then you're in a situation where you either have to become fully polyamorous because now you've fallen in love with somebody who's not your primary partner, and as a result you want independence and the ability to build this new relationship, or you've got to end that relationship with a new person to stay with your primary partner and stay in the boundaries you originally agreed on, but then you're going to resent your primary partner for having to end your other relationship. So the danger zone is that area between swinging and polyamory where you maintain a primary partnership, but you allow a strong emotional connection to grow. A lot of history, a lot of relationships have shown it works better when we really keep those things separate. Either you're fully polyamorous where each individual can have whatever kind of relationship they want, or you're a swinger where the couple remains primary and these other relationships remain secondary with a lot of emotional detachment, where they're prevented from growing into full-fledged emotional connections. Because again, if in the swinging world you begin to develop full-fledged emotional connections, those connections are probably going to seek out more and more autonomy. They're going to seek out more independence, and they're likely going to seek out a desire for for their own flourishing. And then suddenly it's not about the couple who was originally swinging together and their sexual excitement, but it's about the new couple. And again, these things happen. It's not perfectly possible to predict them or control them, but they are going to create a lot of conflict and a lot of change when they do happen. So the safe areas are either being fully polyamorous or limiting your swinging activities to being very friendly sexual relationships that sort of minimize the romantic element, because that romantic element growing is going to tend to lead you into the danger zone between swinging and polyamory. So what fits you, right? You got to think about what you want, whether you're going to stay monogamous, whether you're going to swing, whether you're going to be polyamorous. What is it that you want? That's a time of discussion with yourself, perhaps with others, and then of course with your partner. And I encourage you to seek therapy if you can afford it and you have it available to you, to discuss with others, to continue to read, to watch videos like this, to sort of think about what it is you want before you think about what your partner wants. Because it's my goal that even if you continue in a fully monogamous relationship, you do so now having thought about what you want and having decided those things for yourself, having decided what is it that you want, what sort of sexual exclusivity do you want? Do you want to be able to go dancing and do that? Do you want to be able to watch porn and not feel bad? Do you want to be able to, um, to have a fantasy life? Maybe you do, and you still want to be monogamous. Totally fine. Maybe you don't want those things. Maybe you want a very strict sort of definition of monogamy, and that's what makes you happiest. Okay, but having done so after thinking about the possibilities, not doing so because you feel like you have to. And then, as you begin to explore, I hope you consider the emotional, sexual, and logistical complexity that's going to arise regardless of your choice, because it's not as simple as just sort of saying this is what I want, and magically you're polyamorous. If you're in a monogamous relationship and you both agree you'd like to be polyamorous, there's a journey, there's learning together, there's learning apart, there's learning how to communicate, there's learning how to not communicate, there's learning where the boundaries are with what you share about one relationship with another relationship and how you grow those relationships. All of that is a journey, and you've got to consider that. So my request for you, for your mental health, is that you do this slowly, that you do this carefully, that you consider these options, and that you be prepared for the bumps that will happen, no matter how slow and careful and considerate you are. Because there's one thing to read about it, it's one thing to learn about it, it's one thing to say this is what you want, and it's another thing to actually go through it and do it, and learn how to regulate your emotional triggers, learn how to communicate honestly without being codependent with your partner, learn how to express the variety of needs and wants that you have with partners, and how to not express certain things with other partners, not because you're lying, but because you're trying to be faithful to various people's commitments. It's a journey that you have to go through, and in going through that journey, the more preparation you've had, the better and more smooth the journey is going to be for you. So, in closing, there's no one relationship size that fits all. In fact, relationship sizes that might fit you at one point in life might actually not fit at other points in life. No matter what you choose, there are joys and there are challenges. Monogamy has some great benefits, and it has some real challenges. Polyamory is amazing and difficult. Swinging is absolutely fun, but once in a while, not so fun. So, being aware of these challenges, being able to be consistent, being able to communicate, these are the keys. First of all, communicating with yourself what it is that you want as an individual, and then communicating with your partner and partners what it is that you want, and then being authentic to that, to live that out, even as the transition to that is difficult and the journey to that can be sometimes difficult to navigate. So I hope that this time that we've spent together has enabled you to consider these things, and I hope that you leave this video having some food for thought and having the ability to make a better informed decision for what you want in your relationship or relationships moving forward.